All right, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Monti Knode here with Horizon 3 AI, joined with Naveen Sunkavally, who is our chief architect with Horizon 3. How are you doing, Naveen?
Doing great.
Dude, you look good. This is looking sharp, man.
Yeah, I heard there was a webinar today, so.
So decided to get cleaned up. Well, we could all follow your example. So I am really excited because this is something you and the engineering team have been working on for a while, and that is external pen testing. And so what we are going to do today is walk through an attacker's perspective to be able to share with everybody this new product to release that we just had for launch here a couple weeks ago, and exactly how you use it, why that matters. So we're going to go ahead and nosedive in so that we can get to the demo here shortly, because what exactly is the problem? Why do we want to go through external pen testing? Why is this such a high ask? Because when we look as an attacker's perspective, some of the things an attacker is always asking is, can we access that sensitive data? Can we compromise critical infrastructure? Can we reach those protected applications? Can we compromise the company brand? And so one of the things that's always interesting is a lot of companies, one of the first things they ask is, can we breach the perimeter? They want to know if that perimeter can be breached, but there's a whole lot more surrounding that question. And so we want to make sure that we are addressing this in a strong way. And so how we go about doing that is with the perimeter. What a lot of people identify as a perimeter is they typically view this as a firewall that's extended. I'm good. This is my perimeter. Let's see if you can get through this. And what you start finding out is when you do a little bit of research, well, actually, I got a web application that's sitting at the front end. It's connected to a database at the back end. And well, maybe I do have a few more servers sitting at the front, but the bottom line is the back end should still be good. Where we're doing our business, where we're conducting our operations should still be good. And this is where you have at that perimeter, you want to make sure that you're identifying what is my security tooling, and maybe what are those hosts and servers that I've got out there, because we've got a lot of ports protocol services that are up and running, data repositories that are at public facing. And through the pandemic and what we've seen has already really accelerated cloud growth, there's a lot more third-party software and APIs that we're connecting to, let alone if you look at a couple other companies like NodeZero that'll say identity is the new perimeter. We've all seen this in a lot of reports on where this is really where it's been a lot of compromises happen. And so what you find out is maybe that line that's going across the perimeter isn't so definitive, because we've got corporate infrastructure that's out there that's connecting to others, that's connecting through public networks. And when we start looking at that a little more, we actually do have cloud, and that's connecting to our inside and our external side. And now we're in a work from home environment. What are those work from home environments and the VPNs that are connecting? And so the real question we start asking is, how do you know? How do you know what that perimeter is, what that attack surface looks like, so that you're keeping up with it on a regular basis, because it is constantly changing. And so here's the problem that we're finding is that our business is online, everything is the perimeter, and our attack surface is growing. And so when we talk about that, we want to make sure that you can get an attacker's perspective. And so, Naveen, if you wouldn't mind just identifying here, when we talk about that attacker's perspective and external attack vectors, what exactly is NodeZero doing on the outside that's just like an attacker would do?
Yeah, I think, Monty, you make a really good point about what is the perimeter today, right? And it's not just, what are you exposing through the DMZ on the network? It's anything that's internet facing is really your perimeter. And there's so much data that companies are exposing that those are assets. That's part of your perimeter. You have cloud services that you're using. You've got S3 buckets. You've got repos that you're hosting in GitHub that may have sensitive secrets. Third-party services that you're using that might be exposing your data. That's all part of your perimeter effectively. So anything that an attacker can get access to public facing from the internet is, what I would call the perimeter. And so what does NodeZero do? It will look at identifying all of the assets that you're exposing. So that includes, looking at source code repos like GitHub, looking at all the different cloud services you're exposing, looking at Azure Active Directory, if you're using that, which pretty much everyone is using Office 365 or some version, looking at what kind of web applications you're exposing, your VPNs or firewall. So it's an exhaustive process to get all of that in one place, and then start thinking about how does an attacker try to attack those assets? What can they get from the data that they can use to pivot into other infrastructure? What kind of vulnerabilities or misconfigurations are there? So that's the overall process.
So Naveen, to follow up on that just a bit, because I think when we talk about external and internal, one of the things people tend to forget is it's not just endpoints, it's chaining the attack path. Can you just talk real quick about how that works, about using one vulnerability in combination with a misconfiguration, in combination with a credential, why an attacker does this?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all real world attacks involve chaining. So using information in one place to do something else in another place. So basic example, let's say you've got a weak credential or default credential, and an attacker is able to password spray and get into a web application, or maybe they get access to email, then they can use that and pivot into other infrastructure. Maybe that gets them access to the VPN in some way. So that's the process of what a pen test does. And it's, a lot of scanners out there stop at that very first step of saying, okay, you've got a CVE, maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not. But an attacker, a pen tester, takes all these different pieces of information and chains it together to get as far possible as, to get to your crown jewels, to disrupt your business. And that's what we're trying to show, the kinds of attack paths that are available to attackers to be able to inflict that kind of damage.
There we go. And so how we look at that is when you look at that perspective and you've seen that maneuver loop that we showed on that previous side, and whether it's internal or external, the bottom line is you've got to identify those assets, because there's going to be, as you start going through your process, you're going to find assets you maybe didn't know were there that are going to pop up additionally. We've all heard of shadow IT. We all know your admins might be connecting to other products in other ways to do their job. And so those with privileged rights are even more dangerous. And so understanding what those assets look like so that you've got a better idea of what exactly am I showing to the internet really helps you understand an attack path and how those items can be chained together to get to that crown jewel, such as an AWS cred that might be saved on an on-prem asset and could be turned and used in AWS S3 buckets and give you those keys to the kingdom. That's where you start to understand how an attacker might even know more about your network than you originally thought, because that's what they do, is chain those paths together. So what we really wanted to make sure this is how you know. This is how you know, are my endpoint security tool rules, all my policies, are they working like I crafted? And how could somebody get to those crown jewels? So let's go ahead. What I really want to do is be able to lead you in. What me and Naveen are going to do is get out of the PowerPoint and get out of the brief and go into the product. So you can see this at work. So you can see this is where on our website where you can go in, you can see an external pen test demo, and you can get started and try NodeZero yourself, where you can jump into that immediately. So what I'm going to do is pull over what it looks like once you get in. This is the portal. And now we're going to run an external pen test. The first thing you're going to do is go in and you're going to set up external assets. And so when we do this, you're going to set up an external pen test. Let's go to the external assets. You're going to create an asset group. And what this is really you just identifying where you want to authorize NodeZero to pen test. So if you want to make sure, you can go ahead and come on in here. There's my company name. Now maybe I'm going to do my domain, and you'll see NodeZero will automatically identify it. These are the top level domains. Okay, your TLDs, you're going to put those in. Then you can add Git accounts, AWS accounts, because as you already heard Naveen walk through, those are things that are part of our public-facing domain, public-facing assets as well. And now you get into this side of the house with your company name. Why would the company name matter here, Naveen? What exactly are we doing here?
Yeah, the company name is, this is optional information, but it can be helpful for cases where we want to enumerate more open source intelligence. We'll try to figure this out automatically, but if you give us specific names, then we will use that company name to search for everything about that company online. So basic example, using that company name, we can start to enumerate employees at the company and then figure out what those usernames are, and then use that to try to password spray with those usernames. So, I mean, that's a simple example, but company name is useful information.
And that's really valuable. And I'm glad you walked through it, because that's something that can be utilized both internal and external pen tests, because understanding how that password spray works, how attackers are making open source intelligence connections on the outside to create impacts on the inside is really pretty key and core. And so what you've seen is I just went through and just a couple clicks, created an asset group. And what you're going to do is run that asset discovery. And what NodeZero is going to do is spin up from the cloud, and it is going to do an asset discovery. It's going to look at that top level domain. You can see where it's spun up here real quick, and now it's going to run. And what that looks like after it gets done running is over here, you're going to see where when you click into this, you're going to see the different domains that you might have identified. And what you can do is authorize those domains. So when I click on one, I'm going to take that action and add it to the configuration. Because what I really want to do is go into the domain side of the house here. Now, Naveen, can you walk me through a little bit here? What am I looking at? All this data that's here. I see some that's not reachable. Some's got third-party alias. This is where NodeZero went through an asset discovery, and it identified the host, the IPs, everything connecting. What would you advise people here when they see this page, how they should proceed?
Yeah. So this part of the process, so what is NodeZero doing in asset discovery? It's doing what an attacker would do to try to identify everything you're exposing out there. And so a lot of it involves passive DNS enumeration, but there's also lightweight port scanning that we do for all these assets. For websites, we'll try to capture screenshots of what's being shown there. And what's presented here is pretty much every asset that's connected to your company on the perimeter. Now, some of these could be third-party services. And some of these could be hosted in the cloud, some of these could be on-prem. And it's important for pen testing externally to be able to know that you're really pen testing assets that you manage yourself. And so the purpose of this page here is to give the user all the information to determine, is this something I can pen test or not? And so this information includes DNS records, IP addresses, screenshots, whether the asset's reachable or not, where it's hosted, the ISP and so forth. Is it in the cloud, which cloud, and so forth. And so there's a process here. This part by itself, even before we get to the external pen test, can be really eye-opening for a lot of clients that we've worked with, because many people don't even understand what they're exposing. And when they see this for the first time and start working through this list, they realize, okay, I didn't know I had this. I didn't know I was using this third-party service. And so this process by itself is hugely valuable just to start getting your attack surface managed, just to understand what's out there. And then you go through the process of authorizing it. So Monty, you can walk through that process, how that looks like.
You bet. So now I'm going to select. So let's say I'm really concerned about my APIs. I can just go through and I can select everything that NodeZero found. that was reachable. You can see some are not reachable. That's where, hey, the DNS is showing that there was some communication in the past, but NodeZero tried to connect with the device and found it was either offline or it was not active. So it was unreachable at the time. I'm going through and I'm going to identify, maybe on my dev side, I want to know from that, hey, this is where I'm connected with AWS. I want to make sure, even on the third-party aliases where I've got this kind of thing, do I really want to attack that? So let's identify here, maybe I just want to look at a couple of the APIs where we're staging those up. And now I come down here to take action. So I'm not going to pen test everything found, but at this point, now what I can do, I can mark those IPs as static. I can mark them as dynamic, because sometimes whether you're using Beanstalk in AWS or some other capabilities may stand up. I can remove the authorization from a previous pen test, or for this, I'm going to authorize this. Now you can see I've authorized these couple assets. Now it's showing the status. These are authorized. Now I can click on run the authorized pen test. So as soon as I click there, you can see the ephemeral architecture spin up. Now it comes back to that point, and now it's provisioning to actually complete the external pen test. And so you could see just in a couple clicks how you went through, you identified what you wanted, the top level domains, you authorized the assets. Now what you get, and now you executed the pen test. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go into a couple pen test results so that you can see what NodeZero would have found based on the assets you authorized and what this means. Because when we go through, just like with an internal pen test, you can go through and you can see the full configuration for all of your domains, what you authorized and what you did not authorize NodeZero to actually run an exploit on. And as we go up, you can see the best practices, which are aligned with the CIS security controls, the 18 of those. But the big money here is really understanding, hey, these are the weaknesses that NodeZero found and the business impacts, those critical items that NodeZero was able to parlay those into. And you can see on the external side, there's a couple additional ones, such as perimeter breach, business email compromise, brand compromise. Let's go ahead and go into that just a little bit, and let's identify why some of these matter. So let's identify here, this is a business email breach, and how, Naveen, if you could walk us through the attack path here to show exactly what NodeZero did and how it got to the crown jewel at the end.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great impact to show, because oftentimes in the media, if you listen to the news, it's all about this latest 0 day, what happened there, and like, quick, everyone's got to patch really quickly. But really what attackers are exploiting day in, day out is credential attacks, like weak passwords and credentials. And so as part of our external pen testing offering, one of the things we've automated is the ability to password spray using your users, automatically enumerating the users that belong to your company, and trying a lot of bad passwords to try to breach your network. And so Azure Active Directory is something that many customers use. And so in this example here, we have a test environment where we're able to show that we can enumerate a user, identify that company's Azure account, and then password spray and log in as that user. Moreover, we're able to prove that this user doesn't have MFA enabled, so no multi-factor authentication, which is one of the biggest issues we see on external pen testing efforts that, for our clients, is they don't have MFA enabled for critical applications. So in this case, this person's email was accessible without MFA, and so we're able to access Outlook, Office 365, and then we provide as proof metadata. We're very sensitive to the data we're collecting. It's all masked, but just enough to show that we actually got access to this user's email, all from external, just password spray, getting into the email and showing what that looks like. And so, this is kind of a big impact. You can imagine how this extends across the company if you had poor password policy management across a bunch of different users and the type of data they can be exposing, the type of groups that they're part of, if they're marketing, finance, and sales, and so forth. So that's this impact.
Well, and just think about how much more legit, because an attacker wants to look legitimate. Having CVEs is one thing, but looking legitimate with credentialed access means I don't got to burn a CVE. I don't have to go to the dark web, find a 0-day or something. When you've got company business email access, your efforts just became a lot easier to be able to maintain persistence in that environment. And so this is one way of coming at it from the external side. Let's go ahead and step over here, and we're going to look at a couple others. So perimeter breach. There's a couple different ways we have perimeter breach here. Log4j was a big one here that hit a lot of people at come Christmas time. And you can see, just as with internal, in this particular case, Log4j was used in this example, where this, you can see our Interact server. And the way we're doing this is where we're showing when we find this vulnerability or this weakness, we're going to do it with proof of exploit. So we're not just looking to see that it's vulnerable to this, we're actually going to exploit it. In this case, what we do is a recursive DNS lookup. So we're reaching out to our Interact server, and that's how we know that we were at, when we put in that string, that it was actually able to execute this at a log4j level. And because this was public facing, was there any other one here that you thought on the perimeter breach that you might feel would be valuable to go into, Naveen?
Yeah, there's a lot of really good ones that are things that we've seen in real world environments. So if you go to the last log4j one, Monty, that one. So if you scroll down further, yeah, so this one, for instance, when Log4Shell broke, one of the first things that attackers started targeting was VMware Horizon. Oops.
Sorry, I got to log back in. Go ahead, keep going.
And so, as part of our external pen testing suite and also internal, we're able to show that we can not only detect Log4Shell, but actually exploit it. So if you go to the proof further to the right, Monty, yeah, this one. So this is actually running a command on that VMware Horizon server. So it's running a curl command proving that we have remote code execution. So it's not just DNS lookup, it's actually running a command on that host showing, okay, your perimeter has been breached definitively as a result of this vulnerability. And Monty, if you back out to critical infrastructure, the previous place, we can go through a few more. So recently there was a big F5 CVE that came out. That one right there. This is another one that, we've proven remote code execution, breaching the perimeter as a result of having this facing the internet. So again, this is our test environment, but these are real world things that we see at clients. And again, proof of remote code execution. If you click on that proof, you can see we got access as root on this F5, and we dumped the Etsy shadow file, which only a root user can access. So there's lots of good examples here. CVEs are one thing, but let's not forget there's tons of things that aren't CVEs. There's misconfigurations. So there's another example with Jenkins. And so we see this all the time, even though it's well known, you shouldn't be exposing certain things on Jenkins. But in this example, we have, I think it's the second one, Monty, there.
Is it the domain user?
No, it's in the critical infrastructure one.
Oh, the critical infrastructure, my bad.
Yeah, if you look at the
unauthenticated access to Jenkins, yep.
Yep, so this is an example we saw recently at a customer where they didn't even know they were exposing this. It was just kind of lost IT, but it was out there, it was attached to their company. And so this is basically an unauthenticated instance of Jenkins where anyone could go in and Jenkins has some well-known ways to get remote code execution and then pivot from there. So here we've proven RCE on a web application that's exposing Jenkins here as well. So lots of examples, and this is just kind of a sample of what we do.
Yep, and so being able to identify this as well, one of the last ones, brand compromise. So when we talk about cross-site scripting and everything, what exactly is cross-site scripting, Naveen?
Yeah, so cross-site scripting is a vulnerability in a web application um, that normally requires user interaction. And so it's a way for an attacker to inject malicious payloads into effectively the browser. So it's a client-side attack. So users of your applications that you're exposing are affected by cross-site scripting attacks. So attackers can inject payloads that can do things in the user's browser as a result of using your web application if it's vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And so what kind of things can they do? They can harvest user information. They can put up fake forms, for instance, and get your users to try to log into them. So there's lots of attacks they can do once they're sitting in the user's browser and looking like they're trusted coming from your web application. So we call that brand compromise as an impact because really it affects the credibility of your company if attackers can use these kind of attacks to harm your own users or other users or launch lateral phishing attacks and so forth from there. So
there we go. Thank you very much. So everybody, we're coming up. We're at about 27 minutes in, so we got a few more minutes here. Wanted to make sure that you all got to see just how easy it was to be able to run the pen test on your own and see these results. So if I can go back here, I just want to recover. First thing you're going to do when you go in, you're going to see this at the top. You can start right from there. You can click over on this button. We give you a number of different ways to help get you started and prompt up. So with running the external pen test, the first thing you're going to do is an asset discovery. Because just like Naveen said, my goodness, there's a whole lot of information you can learn from that. And so you're going to identify your top level domains, and NodeZero will identify all the IPs and hosts that are underneath those top level domains supporting that TLD. And so you're going to go into that function. Once you get the asset group, then this is the one that I'm running right now. Once you get the asset group, then you are going to go in and you're going to identify which assets you want to authorize for a pen test. So when you get your pen test, you may come down here, identify from those domains which one you would want to do, check those third-party aliases. You're going to come in, make sure that you authorize it, and we'll even, if something doesn't look quite right, because maybe there's a third-party alias, maybe there's another website, we're going to give you a warning that's going to pop up and say, hey, want to make sure that you review this and that you truly authorize this asset. So you can go in there, authorize the asset, and then once you're ready to run the pen test, you'll be able to come in, get your own results, go through those results, and that's what really leads us towards that the last step here, because what we recommend going forward, find those exploitable problems within your network and on the outside, on the external, fix those one that matter most. When you looked at the results, the one last thing I wanted to identify, we're context scoring everything. So you'll notice when something is at the very top, we're showing it because it led to a critical impact. This one that's at the top there went to a perimeter breach and the discovery of 172 credentials. So when it's something that's got a base score, we're going to show what that base score is and how that base score got elevated based on the finding that came from it. So even like a log4j where that's a high 7.5, this one got elevated because it led to critical infrastructure compromise and perimeter breach, okay, with additional credentials and even data stores. So that's why we want to make sure you're fixing the problems that matter most. And then once you get through, you can verify those problems have been resolved. You can rerun the operation. You can compare those operations. You can even do a one-click verify where you just want to check that one weakness on those particular hosts where it popped, so that you can truly get towards answering, are my crown jewels at risk? Are my rules, tools, and teams effective? And where are we weak and what was that business impact? Because that's what you've got to know going forward. So one of the questions, Naveen, we do have just a little bit of time for a couple of questions from Cyril. He said, can you pivot from compromised machines? Can you explain that just a little bit?
yeah, we can do some pivoting from compromised machines on external, specifically around credential attacks and taking those credentials and trying to enumerate and go as far as we can. If pivoting is specifically about implanting, that's not something we've enabled for external. Um, we do that on internal. We do pivot from machine to machine and go, move laterally. Um, for external to internal pivoting, that's not something we've enabled. We're actually would be really curious to get feedback on if that's something that clients would want us to do in the first place, because the fact that we've breached the perimeter in the first place is a huge deal for a lot of clients. And it's kind of a Sev zero. People are going to immediately lock down that point. And do we want to further exploit, go deeper into the network at that point when we've already done kind of the worst thing we could do to a company from this pen test? So that's the reason we haven't turned that on, but that is something that we do in an internal pen test routinely.
Good answer. Good answer. And I'll tell you, so Naveen, when we talk about how long it takes, what should they expect? It shows a couple clicks going through, if I'm not mistaken, to really get to run that pen test. And there's a part where you can brute force subdomains and really enumerate that. Can you talk about what all NodeZero is doing in that asset discovery and how that relates to how long it takes for the pen test, for the discovery, and then the pen test to complete?
Yeah, so there's two phases. So the asset discovery and the actual external pen test. So asset discovery really depends on how many assets you're exposing. And so that process, if you're a large company with thousands and thousands of subdomains out there, it can take a while. There's a flag we have for brute forcing subdomains, basically using word lists of well-known subdomains also. That's optional. We recommend starting with that off, so you can just start to get a big picture of what's out there. And then later on, turn that on because that's more thorough. It's better to do that so you can uncover things that couldn't be found otherwise. But normally it's even for a large enterprise, I would say it's not any more than a day or two to cover asset discovery. And then you get into the external pen test itself, and that is fairly fast. I mean, because compared to an internal pen test, it's not 40,000 assets people usually have on the internet. It's a lot smaller. And so we're able to pen test those pretty fast. Again, we're using automation, machines working at machine speed. So we're able to do this, orders of magnitude faster than a human pen tester could do. Normal scope for a human pen test would be, just look at a couple of different applications that I'm exposing, or one small environment or subnet. We're doing an external pen test across everything that you want to put in scope. And that's on the order of maybe a day or two, even for an external pen test.
Thank you for that. I think that's a great point to clarify, is that differentiation between traditional, which is where the consultants come in, you gear up, you got to schedule them, bring it in, and then you got to wait for the report. With this, it's completely autonomous. You don't have to tell it which places to go and do. NodeZero will act just like an attacker, going after what's most important, both on the external and the internal. And the last thing, I know that this is very focused on the external side and those external attack vectors. But I think if a company is going to really understand its security risk and its profile, they've got to look both internal and external. You look at the Zero Trust framework, it says presume breach. When you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, first thing they're talking about is attack paths. Do you have any reinforcement on that you'd want to make sure everybody, since we're getting ready to close here, that we leave them with a good taste in their mouth on running both sides, internal and external?
Yeah, I mean, in general, enterprises have many networks with many assets. Some of them are public facing on the internet. Some of them are in the DMZ. Some of them are in a user subnet, server subnet, maybe in a hybrid cloud network, or just a cloud network, VPC. It's important for defense in depth and how you do security the right way to be able to test yourself from all those different angles, right? So test yourself from the outside, but also test yourself from the inside in each of these different networks and positions and see if an attacker lands here, what can they do? Presume breach is exactly right because, again, it's not about the CVEs that you're exposing and shutting those down. A lot of times attackers are getting in through compromised credentials. And so if they're already in your network, what can they do? And so it's important to threat model your whole enterprise, all the different networks that you have, and test yourself from all those different perspectives and limit as much as possible from each of those perspectives.
And that is the whole truth right there. You don't know until you actually attack. And that's when you really start to find out things, taking that attacker's perspective. So we want to thank you very much. Thank you, Naveen. I'll tell you, you and the engineering team have really built something special here, both internal and external. Thank you for joining me here for a little bit. And I'm looking forward to what comes next from you guys here. This is really cool, that Azure side of the house, being able to bust in on that and create business email compromise. That's only the beginning of where we're showing how attackers chain different weaknesses. And that was one of those interesting things with that. There were a couple different things that led to that ultimate impact at the end. And everybody, I highly encourage you. We've got the website, we've got our email. You can check us out across Twitter as well and get to even see the attacker team and what they put out there. Definitely want to make sure that you go in, know that you've got access to be able to run the free demo whenever you want, and start fixing what matters. So thank you, Naveen. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you, brother.